I'm Inge and this is Jack, and we are from Sydney, Australia, and we are from a company called S1T2. So thanks for checking out our talk. We are from a creative technology company called S1T2.
For those of you who are curious or haven't heard of us, that stands for Story First, Technology Second. We use this philosophy to try to weave story and interaction into various interactive medias from installation, sculpture, VR and AR, game development, web, and any other technological platform. So we both work within the real-time team, and we both use Unreal Engine to kind of push these ideas through our work. Yeah,
so I'm Inge, and within the real-time team at S1T2, I'm an artist and kind of just a generalist as well, wearer of many hats.
And I'm Jack, and I lead the real-time S1T2 team. My main mandate is to push everyone into Unreal Engine because we have a fairly cross-disciplinary team and try to make that as exciting as possible.
Yeah, so an interesting part of our team is that the majority of us come from fine arts backgrounds. So this can make for really interesting work and really influences the products that we make.
So for a bit of background, the work on the left is by Inge, and the work on the right is my work. This was from a different time, a different career, if you will. But it kind of gives you a bit of an insight into the kind of ideas that we might be interested in, where this talk's going to kind of travel down.
Yeah, so that's my work there, the little dude looking at that moss garden. And so before I did video games, I was a figurative sculptor, and I worked in ceramics. And I made these characters that kind of interacted with gaming platforms, and within those gaming platforms I planted little moss gardens and environments, and they spoke of looking into a digital sublime, which is something that I'm going to be talking a little bit about later. So then, yeah, after I did that, I found video games, and now I'm with S1T2.
Myself, before joining S1T2, I had a professional art practice in photo media, which I've kind of given up in, with respect to video games. This work was done in Mexico, but I was lucky enough to work in Germany and Brazil, as well as Australia, my home country, in various artist residencies. I also worked in a lot of galleries as a co-director and artist-run initiatives. So that's basically a gallery that's run by artists for artists that serves the community, which gave me a background of where art can be used and where it can't be used. My work deals with concepts of utopian desire, and I work within the theory of the tableau. It could best be described as being hit by a truck full of semiotics.
Okay, so we're here to talk to you today about how art theory can be useful to your own art practices, but also how you can incorporate them into your own digital pipelines.
So why use art theory? And why does being conscious of it make your production pipelines more powerful? What makes it a relevant tool and not just an academic pursuit? Games is a relatively new artistic practice, and gaming as an art form exists within a much larger artistic discourse. We work with the exact same concepts. Gaming is not exempt from art history. And because of that, we're able to utilize the existing resources of art historians, critics, and theorists to better inform and give us language, context, and be part of a much broader discourse in game design.
Yeah, so art theory can serve as this kind of common tongue, and you can use it to clearly define and communicate about games and styles and concepts that you really love within your teams. And so when using this language, especially within multidisciplinary teams, it can be really useful to kind of share this cohesive vision. It's a way of thinking, and it's a way of examining and then defining and then exploring and giving your research this kind of scope. So it can be a really powerful tool within your arsenal of research, if you will. So if you really enjoy having like juicy chats about like, what is the meaning of this? What is the meaning behind this mechanic or this art style, or where are we going with this? Then maybe delving into art theory could be something for you. And yeah, as Jack said, the wider artistic discourse is a really interesting part of it, because games and game design is a part of that wider artistic discourse.
So, oh, that was too early. That's a secret animation. We'll get there.
Wait for it.
We've discovered the animation settings in Google Drive, and it's been really exciting.
A little bit too exciting.
So for this talk, we've selected two art theory examples, Romanticism and the Baroque period, or what we're going to call now R&B, delivering the punchline. There you go. So why R&B? Well, because we kind of had to pick two. It's worth noting that our team came from many different backgrounds with different diverse ideas and different kind of conceptual biases. But our main focus for this talk is just going to be R&B because that's what relates to our own personal art practices, and it's where we came from. So we're going to talk about Romanticism, we're going to talk about the Baroque, why it's relevant to us. Then we're going to link these concepts to other games that are being developed and try to show where they can be, where these elements can be seen. And finally, we're going to show you how these things have actually helped us design a game that we're working on called Kept, a VR adventure game.
Yeah, so overall in this talk, we're going to try and demonstrate a number of different things that we've found really useful, which is that you can use art theory as really interesting source material, and you can use it as a communication tool within your team. But also, this allows to communicate with this larger artistic discourse. So, Jack is going to talk about the Baroque, and then I'm going to talk about Romanticism. So, yeah.
It's worth noting that the takeaways in each kind of area of theory is going to be similar, but it doesn't really matter because it's where you apply them. They're basically tools, and they benefit your application.
All right, take it away, Jack.
So the Baroque. The Baroque's a period in art history that goes for around 150 years from 1600 to 1750, like around abouts. It's a period of artistic styling that really made clearly interpretable symbols that really produced a lot of drama and grandeur in art. The Catholic Church believed and funded the concept that art should communicate religious values with a direct emotional involvement. And the aristocracy viewed the Baroque art as a means of impressing visitors through triumph, power, and control. However, the Baroque has a resonance and application that extends far beyond a period or a style. It's far more relevant to that and way more complex. The Baroque as a period spans over 100 years, so there's so many exciting things to talk about, but I'm only going to focus on two. That's the symbolic power of lighting and the concept of the ruin within the Baroque. So above is a group of games really poorly laid out. I'm not a great grapher, but they're all games that really mean a lot to me, and especially in the development of Kept as a game. They're Kentucky Route Zero, Naissance, which is my French pronunciation there, What Remains of Edith Finch, and Dear Esther. And all these games are so inspiring. They're inspiring beyond words, and therein lies the problem. I know that there's a connection between them deep down in my soul, but I struggle to communicate that or build on it. And not only that, I can't begin to explain that special source to other developers. What are the links between these things? The gaming world might label some of these as walking simulators, or if you're lucky, maybe post-WSD. But these terms are not really enough to fully describe or build upon what is so special. We need a way of understanding what is meaningful to us and why. And that's why what art theory provides is so important to game developers of today. Art theory allows us to communicate complex ideas, and more than that, it allows us to understand ourselves by pinning a label on what we're actually trying to do and saying, that's it, that's the thing. This is Kentucky Route Zero. Have everyone played this game? More or less, yeah. Good, it's a great game. It's by Cardboard Computer, and it's a surrealistic game with rich tones of magic realism. The game feels like a reimagination of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or potentially a visual representation of a Murakami novel. We drive down a highway steeped in nostalgia where we stop and meet really weird kind of strangers along the way. The whole experience feels like a lucid dream where we're traveling over our subconscious. And I found this game through researching magical realism, and it baroque my little mind. This is an artwork by Gregory Bruton. The work's untitled, but it's part of a much bigger series in 2003. Bruton was, at a time, a major inspiration for me because the way he used lighting sort of paralleled a lot of the ideas I was interested in. And I kind of see a lot of this in game development now. So Kentucky Route Zero and Gregory Bruton's photo media work have a lot in common. They're both framed in the cinematic form of the tableau, Both use light in mysterious and meaningful ways, and both focus on the sublime within Middle America while actually talking about the unconscious. The effect of lighting in the tableau not only illuminates subjects, but has the ability to frame them in a psychological context. In Crewdson's work, stage light is used to illuminate figures, as well as the natural, supernatural, and symbolic phenomenon. Crewdson's lighting contains some recurring major themes, particularly an eerie Christian symbolism. Art theorist Martin Holzschliner, which I can't do his name, suggests light is made to stand in for a manifestation of the divine, or to stand in for encounters with the extraterrestrial. The light suggests a world outside of our own, or what Holzschliner calls the lumen supernatural. So, Crewdson's work also finds some really strong parallels with the history of the Baroque, especially our main man, Rembrandt. Where Holzschliner explains Rembrandt having exhausted the power or the potential for artificial light sources as a symbol of truth, Rembrandt instead projected his light inward, so that once what had been a universal symbol of the divine actually became a symbol for the unique human soul. The effect of these symbols coming together creates a really dreamlike aesthetic, where Crewdson's images come close to maybe an aesthetic of the unconscious, and we see this as well in Kentucky Route Zero. How does this actually function or work with Rembrandt? Where's the proof in the pudding? So we see here a work from Rembrandt in 1660, and his use of lighting is kind of strange, like all of his portraits. The light doesn't really resolve itself in any realistic way. Where does the light on the face come from? It doesn't come externally, because otherwise it would be lighting his hat or his amazing cloak. Rather, it comes from the inside out. And that's how Rembrandt was able to deliver these messages. And so too, in Crewdson's lighting, we see light appear from abstract sources, illuminating subjects, creating the lumen supernatural. And the tableau style of lighting is a major theme in Kentucky Route Zero. The game's mostly taking place in the twilight hours, not dissimilar to the Baroque style or even the dark work of Gregory Crewdson. And whilst Kentucky Route Zero no doubt takes cues not only from Crewdson, but also film, literature, the terminologies can help describe the effects or feelings we experience when playing the game. The concept of the lumen supernatural became a major pillar when designing Labyrinth. And through Crewdson, Rembrandt, or Kentucky Route Zero, we're able to find the terms that are relevant. But not only that, we're able to find some pretty cool additional source material. As game developers, we're not shy to the power of lighting to deliver our design, our moods, or our feelings. But being aware of where these thoughts came from and the artists that kind of came from them, the full narrative, can only help add depth into our scenes. So, Naissance, has anyone played this one? Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, awesome. So this was made in Unreal a while ago, and it really is a beautiful work. There's no textures in it. It's just a grey box kind of architectural nightmare, if you will. So I'm going to be using it to talk about the ruin within Baroque discourse. So this is Naissance. It offers a completely different experience than Kentucky Route Zero, but there's still a strong link in the two games' approach. So they both use theory of the Baroque, essentially. So it's a really, really hard game to talk about, and I'm going to try to quote their Steam page. Maybe they can do it better than me, but we'll see how we go. Keep in mind that they're a bunch of very conceptual French people. The main idea behind the game is to make the player appreciate the loneliness, the feeling of being lost in a gigantic, unknown universe, and to be marveled by the beauty of this world, a world which seems alive, leading the player, manipulating him, and playing with him for any reason. Evocative and symbolic, the architecture and events will lead players' imagination to find the answer, if only it matters. So, it's pretty cryptic. I'm going to do my best attempt. So basically this game, we walk around this architectural library lost in time, where busy kind of industrial pipework meets stark brutalism. An overwhelming labyrinth of ideas where traditional narrative is completely abstracted away. In fact, we can't engage with the ruin or the architecture in any literal way, but it can be felt through our interaction. And as a game developer, that really interested me. There was something here to this game that I couldn't quite define, but there was something that if I could understand, I knew it could benefit my work. What exactly was it about this game that was so special? How could I talk about it? How could I find more things like it? So on the right, This is a painting by Giovanni Paolo Panini in the style of the Capriccio. Capriccio means essentially an architectural fantasy, placing together buildings, architectural ruins, and other architectural elements in like quite fictional and fantastical different settings. So this style of painting is part of the larger discourse of the Baroque period. So the Baroque period from the 16th to 18th century played host to a new variety of artistic expression that cliffed fragments and ruins or imagined past and rearranged them, like a puzzle that could never be solved, into nearly endless variety of novel forms and iterations. Walter Benjamin had the idea that the artists and writers of the Baroque didn't really ever invent anything. Instead, they would take pieces of antiquity and push them together to form new and exciting elements, almost like a collage of ruin. To Walter Benjamin, the ruin or its fragments constituted the finest material for the Baroque artists. And the era's artists and writers collected these fragments with the hope that new work would somehow come together out of all these cultural elements. For Benjamin, the ruin is not a literal remain of an ancient civilization, but rather a narrative. It's the narrative, visual, and textual elements scattered through the fields of history. And this might seem like a pretty convenient link. The ruins of Naissance with their cold, fantastical architecture and could straight up be called a Capriccio. But the game developers may have never intended that. It doesn't matter. Art theory has enabled me to talk about this really weird, complex game to talk about with you guys. And not only that, it's linked it to a cultural context. Regardless if the author is a fan of Naissance or not, I have been able to identify essentially, for me, what makes this game tick. I'm able to take that language on. And it's this understanding that's key, not only to better communicate ideas, but to potentially identify themes within your own work and maybe see where your head's at when you're looking at your mood boards. And in doing so, you can focus and strip back elements in your game that aren't important, overall allowing your game's message to sound out stronger. So I just wanted to dive a bit deeper into the Baroque. I think it's interesting that these themes are still coming up in a lot of modern media. And to better understand that, we need to understand the mindset of the time and maybe the mindset of our time. So within the Baroque period, we developed the telescope. And the telescope changed everything. All of a sudden, we were able to chart celestial bodies. We were able to see the scale of the universe. We were able to map stars' paths. And then those telescopes, they turned inwards. The microscope showed us that we were not made in God's image. Rather, we were a collection of cells, individually living and dying. Obviously, this caused a lot of problems for people at the time. They had to deal with all these new facts, and they found it hard to believe truth in what they were seeing. And we still don't have a clue. A growing number of theorists are drawing parallels between the social upheaval of the 17th century and the disorientating effects of the digital technology in the 20th and 21st. Fake news. The digital Baroque era has emerged where we're struggling with the same philosophical problems. So while all art history is essentially responding to the problems or its time, it's still relevant because art theory deals in ideas, and ideas are eternal. So this is another ugly slide for everyone. Today we see a lot of recurring themes and visual tropes in Baroque, as I said. Like we see the Labyrinth, the proliferation of fragment, a field of ruins, the play of light and dark, or the dream. So now armed with our fun new knowledge of art theory, we can start to naturally see these tropes in video games as well. And we can find all new reasons to love them even more, or even potentially add to the discourse or conversation they have begun and created. The proliferation of fragment and ruin can be seen in games such as like Dear Esther. In Dear Esther, our experience of narrative is pretty dynamic and puzzling. We experience the game through exploring an island filled with ruin, and we walk around in snippets from the story of the past narrate as voiceover. As we approach these ruins and old cryptic paintings, we receive fragments of the story. However, there's no literal connection between them, although our mind does a really good job of forming that connection. We hear about characters we've never met and experiences we've never experienced. Or maybe we have. It's kind of up to the player and how they assemble the Baroque puzzle and how they build it together. But regardless of the viewer's ability to make sense of the story, the puzzle was intended by the developers. The voiceover snippets are played at random, so the voiceover content itself is executed in a completely non-linear way every time we play. Just like the artists of the Baroque, the sound is arranged like puzzle pieces in a Capriccio. We experience the physical ruin of the island, but the fragmented voice in a new way each time, each playthrough revealing more, or perhaps a completely different experience altogether. And we see the labyrinth in the puzzle in Naissance, where we're lost within its halls, attempting to find meaning and progress. The use of play of light and dark, a calling card of Baroque, turns the environment into an ever-changing sculpture. The dynamic light illuminates tiny parts of the whole, representing how small we are in these vast wholes of architecture. Perhaps the light is a glimmer of hope in an otherwise incomprehensible world. Here time and history have no meaning, they're strewn together. The ruin was here before we came, it has no builders, and it will remain forever. And in this lonely world, light becomes a character, a friend, a metaphor, or is it us, our projection? With light within Naissance is similar to the light within Cruikshan's work. It becomes a portal for the metaphysical or the supernatural. So finally, any of Giant Sparrow's work really, the dream. In the Baroque narrative, we're never really sure what reality we're in. Have we just woken up, or is this another dream now? Am I wearing pants? Check. The digital Baroque is just another is it just another computer simulation? Metaphysical uncertainty is the hallmark of the Baroque. Who, where, and what are we now? And this concept of ruin and metaphysical uncertainty becomes one of the major designs in Kept. Through understanding Baroque art theory as a lens and all its techniques, we're able to begin to sort through all of these elements that are projected. And this lens is useful to developers because it helps us relate and understand why these games are meaningful. And ultimately, that knowledge can only help to benefit us as designers and developers. The key takeaway here is to look into pop culture, look into video games, of course, look into film, look into literature, and look beyond. Really deep dive into the key terms that are relevant to you and what you're trying to do, after, of course, you find them. And once we understand that when we make games, we are part of a much larger discourse, then we can become part of that discourse. This creates depth in your work and broadens your universe and gives your designs an element of conversation, but ultimately, it creates better games. So I don't want to sound like a Baroque record. I'm probably going to pass it on to Inge to talk about Rembrandt.
All right, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to continue forward in time from the Baroque, but also in tangent with the Baroque, actually. And I'm going to talk to you about why Romanticism is important to me and my art practice, and why I think that it's a really important time in art theory and history for game development. So, what do these games have in common? They sort of have this dreamlike, nostalgic stillness to them. They have a kind of quiet contemplation. Is it the application of light, or color, or contrast, or depth? Is it the God rays, or the particles, or the use of gradients, or bloom? Is it the subject matter? They all show nature and landscapes. And they don't only just show them, but the nature and the landscapes is a really significant part of these games, and appreciating them is a really significant part of these games. They show myth and magic and exploration. And they're not games that make you feel like you're in danger, or like you're about to be attacked or put into panic. They're games that are designed to make you feel something and stop and appreciate what's around you. So some of these common trends are more obvious than others, and it's identifying those common obvious trends and then linking them and then analyzing them all together that makes you be able to unearth some of those less obvious characteristics. So that underlying theme that I'm talking about, something that links all of those games together, is that they all have these romantic qualities to them. So here is a pretty typical romantic painting. It shows this dreamy landscape, showing similar kind of qualities to the game references I showed you. And here we can see that nostalgic stillness and that same kind of quiet contemplation of nature. And all of those components are really typical aesthetics that are seen in romantic artists of the 1800s. So now I know that all of you are probably thinking, I am romantic, but you're not. These guys are romantic, and they're romanticists of the 1800s. So Romanticism, it was a reaction to the complex feelings that were shaken up by the Age of Reason and the Industrial Revolution, when science had explained everything. But all that science and reasoning, it couldn't explain that feeling of awe that one would get when looking over at expansive views, or that time when you're contemplating something beautiful in nature. And this mood is accomplished through soft lighting and use of contrast and delicate gradients and monumental scale. It's that use of the time of day when the sun is just hitting that perfect peak so that the lighting gives you that feeling of this underlying grand narrative. So when relating this back to video games, it could be that great reveal of that pinnacle vista moment. And it's moments like these that the Romantics really tried to capture. So this romantic representation is known as the Romantic Sublime, which is, to put really simply, feelings which inspire both awe and terror. And it's that kind of experience that you might have when you're looking at a cyclone ripping through houses or gigantic waves crashing on a shore on weathered rocks. So this is a painting by Turner, and it's a really clear representation of that romantic sublime feeling. He depicts a lot of these kind of images within his paintings of this kind of natural phenomenon, of this destruction within nature that inspires both awe and terror. It's that kind of combination between a quiet contemplation, but then also screaming horrified into the void. So why is Romanticism important within game development? The Romantics appreciated art and music and literature above everything else. And they believed that through subjective feeling or intuition, some of the most meaningful reflections of humanity could be made. And these games that follow these same kind of romantic concepts, they're games that are made to evoke emotion and deep psychological contemplation. The environments, they're more than just the light and the mood and the scale. They're a study of the human condition. So this notion of the sublime, it can be used to enhance an internal or a physical journey or quest. It's that moment at the beginning of journey when you're going up the hill and then all of a sudden you reach the peak and you see that vista moment and you see the whole journey that you're about to play unfurl in front of you. It's that moment that encourages you in any kind of game that really gets you to stop and look and have a look at the environment around you and really appreciate the art that the developers have made for you. It's representing that moment of looking out into the abyss and representing your feelings of awe and wonder of your position within the universe. So this painting is called Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. And Caspar David Friedrich has depicted himself within this image. He's depicted himself in this kind of psychological, contemplative moment. He, like the rest of the Romantics, was interested in this awe and the power of nature, and inspires feelings of his self-reflection and understanding. And that's also relevant today because video games have the power to take individuals on this same kind of journey and have the same kind of meaningful experiences. So for our game Kept, which is a virtual reality forest exploration, this representation of the Romantic Sublime seemed kind of perfect to incorporate within. It's a game which takes you on this solitary journey. So looking to Romanticism for those same kind of common threads of how they represented this kind of feeling was really useful to get the mood across. So this is Firewatch, and it's a beautiful case study of a game which incorporates these romantic ideals. You play as this character who goes out into the wilderness for an escape from the world, for some solitary contemplation. And this game is packed with these picturesque vistas. It's appreciating both the awe-inspiring qualities of nature, but also the qualities of natural phenomena in their destructive nature. At one point in the game, you're talking to Delilah, the girl that you have this contact with over a radio, and she just tells you to just stop and go and look out into the distance and have a look at this bushfire that's blazing in the distance. And it's a really beautiful moment that kind of gets you to recognize the Romantic Sublime within this game. It's that notion of bushfire that shows a combination of that awe and terror of the extent of destructive natural phenomenon. Also within Firewatch, you're given a camera, which actually doesn't add to the narrative at all, but it just kind of gets you to stop and have a look at what's going on around you and have this moment of just appreciating nature, but also the art within Firewatch. So whether the developers of Firewatch were conscious of incorporating romanticism within this game, it really doesn't matter. The fact is that they're there, and we're able to pick these things apart and understand what they do and how they make you feel and why. So everything that came out this year was really good. As in everything, the game that came out this year was really good. And it has a really interesting motive that goes through the whole game that has a lovely example of the romantic conversation of existence in a contemporary form. And this reflects the romantic notion of the iconic romantic poet and poster boy, William Blake. In his poem, Auguries of Innocence, he states, "To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower," which is so cheesy, but I absolutely love it because I feel like it has this really important concept of that romantic contemplation. So Blake's talking about the micro and the macro of our existence and how far this extends both inwards and outwards. It's that feeling of being a speck in the universe, but at the same time, the beauty and the terror of being the eye of the beholder, and also being the center of our own universes. It's that feeling of both not being able to see the cells that make up objects, but also knowing that they're there, or not being able to understand the scale of the planets, let alone the solar system. Alan Watts's commentary of everything states, "Whoever you are and whatever you are, you're in the middle." And I think that this sums up that concept pretty well. He's specifically talking about those romantic philosophical experiences. Within this game, you can literally play as everything, from molecules to animals, trees, mountains, planets, and universes. And the movements when you're playing as these characters are crude and strange, and it doesn't attach you to any one position within the world. It kind of places you in this state of oneness with everything. So from the dawn of the 1800s, the Romantics have been trying to express the importance of the contemplation of our place within the universe. But it's more than that. It's that human experience is separate from or extends further than the scientific narrative. And all these games that I've shown express that we are still pushing and pulling and experimenting with these ideas. And that was the core idea I wanted to pull into Kept. And it shows when people play it. There's always this presence in the landscape where people both find the expansive silhouette both beautiful and yet terrifying, as it's a space for the unperceivable to happen. So understanding this concept of romanticism allows our work to add to this art theory discourse, or at least it allows us to experiment with it and find new ways of expression. We as developers have the power of always being additive to what defines gaming. And through using art history, we're able to frame how that definition takes place, making much richer environments. So, this is Kept, and Kept is our VR adventure game, and it's set in a magical forest full of ruins, rivers, and rapids, because alliteration.
Thanks, John.
It's been developed for room scale VR, and it is currently still in development. We have released a demo that encapsulates all of these ideas and concepts that Jack and I have been talking about today.
So it's S1T2's first game in the entertainment market, and in that way we're kind of outsiders to any standard pre-production process, if that's even a thing. But perhaps that kind of reflects in this talk in our kind of approach. So VR had just come out, and we really wanted to experiment with it as the medium and really try to push it towards potential, like everyone who jumped into VR. And using our backgrounds was the only thing that kind of made sense to us. So I think all the examples we're shown we were thinking about it, and it showed value in that process. So that's what we did.
Yeah. So Kept shows that art theory is important, and so we're not trying to put Kept on the same pedestal as all of these amazing games and artworks that we've shown you today, but more we're showing you that games and art theory can blend, and that Kept is our conscious exploration of exploring these ideas. And whilst you can probably explore these unconsciously as well, and the ideas might just happen, but this talk is about the value of being conscious within your research. So with Jack coming from the Baroque, and me coming from the Romantic approach, and then our team as well coming from all of their kind of conceptual biases on top of that, it can make pre-production conversation get pretty heated.
Yeah. But I guess like the main thing here is that we all understand conceptually where each other come from. I know that Inge comes from a romanticism, and I can understand her points at a deeper level than, you know, us just yelling at each other about whether the jar looks like this or that or whatever. And that ultimately helps underpin any ideas or anything that you're sharing, and ultimately creates a deeper underpinning of shared ideas as well. And what's kind of best about this is we don't have to settle on any idea really, or any kind of discourse. We can pick and choose, right? Kept is not a game that represents the digital Baroque, nor is it a game that worships the Romantics. It is simply the culmination of our expression represented through tools. And those tools are art theory and history. So where do we end up kind of using all this stuff in Kept? I guess the proof. Kept was made not only in response to art theory, but also VR as a medium. As I said, we were really excited about the medium. And VR as a medium is interesting because in a lot of ways, it really inherently conjures the feeling of the digital Baroque, or specifically that feeling of metaphysical uncertainty. Where am I? Where is my body? Why am I a headless torso? They're all very valid questions when you're in VR. So in response to those kind of feelings, Kept's flow and UX had to kind of reflect that. And this feeling of metaphysical uncertainty was really extended by our UX. When you dropped into Kept, you're not really given any instructions. You don't really know what to do, what you should be doing, or how to do it. And there's no overall clear objective. We never break that fourth wall. Even the menu is a puzzle, which is kind of horrifying when you send that .exe build to like an investor or someone, and you're not even sure if they're going to be able to open the bloody game. You just kind of hope. But actually, that's kind of part of the joy of what we got right. It's beautiful to watch players try to work out what to do, and I think everyone enjoys that when you see someone in VR and you see that little mouth open under the goggles. But these people, they're surrounded by visual stimulus, they're surrounded by symbol, they're surrounded by ruin in full 360. Sometimes it takes people 30 seconds and sometimes the flow is instantaneous, but it's the journey that's important. It's how they interact with things and the order that they choose to do it. In this way, our ruins and semiotics littered around the room scale experience parallels the Baroque puzzle, pushing and highlighting VR's power for metaphysical uncertainty. The demo Kept pulls from a very common fable across many different cultures and many different times. It's the fable of the Grateful Dead. I don't know if anyone knows it, but essentially it's a fable where a person finds a dead body and then they either pay for the funeral or bury it themselves, but almost always a spirit comes back and gives them like a little trinket or some sort of piece of knowledge. And whilst this doesn't come through in our demo because it's so saturated with other semiotics, the idea or the concept of the pilgrimage or the funeral does. And as Walter Benjamin says, it's the texture of these stories that give the Baroque puzzle its real magic. The focus is not on the literal, but rather how these textures come together to form the experience. And within Kept, our mechanics are also designed a little bit like badly by some descriptions, maybe. Our mechanics are designed to give a feeling rather than a functional task. So an example of that would be, I don't know, an Indiana Jones game where you have to throw a lasso over a canyon and then rope yourself across. You're solving a problem. In Kept, to open a door, for instance, or I guess, like the example of connecting two wires and you open the door or you power it, tropes in adventure games. In Kept, you might have to climb up a mountain and fly a kite to open the door, or skim a pebble 3 times across a pond. we weren't interested in creating problems to be solved, but rather we just wanted to deliver feelings and metaphors through our mechanics. And to find these mechanics, we had a pretty abstract process as well. We went through and we tried to list every single emotion that we could come up with. So I came up with 2. That's all the ones I'm aware of, but the rest of the team flooded the whole thing. And then we tried to associate physical actions in the real world that kind of paralleled them or reflected them in some way. So for instance, romanticism, the feeling of awe and inspiration, we decided that, that was the action of catching a butterfly in the palms of your hands and holding there and looking in. And then after we had this massive list of all these emotions and mechanics, we had a list of our emotional physical mechanics, essentially. We worked out what would actually work in VR, and then we kind of went back, and that was enabled us to create a full emotional arc. I guess, in a sense, our intention was for the story of Kept would be told through motion, feeling, and metaphor, and the player would establish who they are and what this meant to them. Remembering that artists of the Baroque never really invented anything, they rather brought all the elements of history together to generate new meaning, and this could easily be compared to what we were trying to do with Kept's narrative flow. None of our puzzles were difficult because they're not based in function. They're simply devices carefully placed throughout our landscape in the same way that Dear Esther places its audio to create texture and a rich tapestry of feeling and perhaps new meaning.
So, the Romantic Sublime influence is all over the place in Kept. We've taken influence and inspiration from these meditative landscape paintings of the 1800s. Kept adopts some moody lighting and contrast cues from artists such as Julius Sergius von Cleaver, which I think you should probably all adopt as D&D character names. Our use of fog and depth are used to inspire feelings of mystery and reflection. And this game leads you on this kind of forest pilgrimage. We want the players to really feel saturated in the atmosphere of our digital forest. Our story arc actually follows the seasons as well as different times of day to suggest time passing. It's a journey of our existence and our impermanence. So Kept is a gateway into this digital romantic sublime simply through the nature of being VR. The activity of virtual reality is solitary, or most of the time it is. It takes you from your current position and puts you within a whole other world. And this reflects the solitary practices of the Romantics and their appreciation for retreating to nature or soul-searching. When I first tried virtual reality, my immediate reaction was this realization of how easily reality can dissolve around you, and what a powerful tool this was to create meditative spaces. So creating Kept was amazing for this. It was an amazing opportunity to create these alternative spaces for people to have these internal journeys. It was creating a whole wondrous journey for people to experience within their living rooms. So I adapted this mentality to my workflow as I was creating environments within Kept. I spent a lot of time sitting or lying on the floor within virtual reality, just really enjoying the space and really thinking about the mood that I wanted to be situated within. And every now and then moving a mushroom like a centimetre to the side, or like adding a little clump of grass here or there. And the really important thing was thinking about these romantic ideals and how could I possibly tweak or adjust different aspects of this to get that same kind of feeling of overwhelming awe and terror. So to really send this feeling of the romantic sublime home, we played with the contrast of scale, and this really adds to that monumental feeling of the power of nature. Large expansive areas spark the romantic sublime feelings of awe and terror as huge trees tower above you, and the fog appears to recede off into the endless void. This is also countered by minute little details that we scattered here and there for little contemplative moments for our players to find, to inspire wonder and intrigue. And this moment is enhanced when you catch the firefly and you get to explore the environment further. And this strengthens your connection to the environment and your journey within this experience. It gives you purpose. So ultimately, the ideals of the Romantics complement Kept in this vision of the journey. We're creating a game that strives to take you on an internal adventure, letting you freely explore your surroundings without being scared of being attacked. All of our decisions we make within the development work towards giving this player a beautiful and meaningful experience. Something to inspire awe and wonder and personal reflection.
I'm going to briefly talk about the lighting in Kept to just kind of finish the point. So the lighting in Kept has this kind of link with the lumen supernatural. You can see these kind of, well, GPU particles really, but flying around everywhere. So the lighting obviously is pulling from the Baroque tradition of the supernatural, a gate between a beautiful forest world and a world of mystery and the unknown. It's our random spotlight in Twin Peaks that seems to emulate the mood, or it's our spaceship from Close Encounter of the Third Kind that makes you want to just obsessively make art when it hits you in your car. Kept uses no directional lights or skylights. Instead, the basic functions of light, like informing shape and silhouette and orientation of the world, therefore, is handled by the fog that we use. So that kind of frees up Kept, and it kind of gets Kept's lighting to do whatever it wants. And similar to Rembrandt's work, light doesn't have to originate from a light source. It can kind of create its own rules, and it can kind of say what it needs to. There's no kind of rule of consistency in Kept in terms of lighting. Light is an entity unto itself. Just like Naissance's light is a character or spirit, Kept's light is quite literally a little firefly.
So, to conclude, so something that we talked about was that art theory can be used as a way to find new source material, and that art history can be used as a communication tool within your team. And that all of this allows us to make better work and helps us communicate with this greater artistic discourse that's constantly going on around us.
So thinking about your project, likely you've got mood boards, art bibles, game design docs, all these kind of things. What is it that connects all of this inspiration? I'm sure you feel it within you, but what name does it have? Art theory can give you the language to define just that. And if you have a good look at them, you'll see maybe you've got a homie hanging out in art history that you can high five with and talk about concepts. But look, most excitingly, it's fun to go out there and find the name of your innermost thoughts.
Thank you.